There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a first-class cabin when the unspoken rules of privilege are suddenly challenged. It's not a quiet silence. It's thick, heavy, and humming with judgment. Maya heard the clinking of champagne flutes stop. She felt the eyes of the other passengers burning into the side of her face. The flight attendant stood over her, an uncomfortable, tight smile plastered on her face, hand extended. "Ma'am, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass again. We have a passenger who says you're in her seat." Maya wasn't in the wrong seat. She was just in the wrong skin. The harsh, fluorescent lights of JFK's Terminal 4 did little to dampen Maya Caldwell's mood. At 32, Maya was the youngest senior partner at Oak and Sterling, a premier venture capital firm based in Manhattan. She had spent the last 72 hours in back-to-back negotiations, running on espresso, sheer willpower, and the adrenaline of a $40 million acquisition that she had single-handedly closed just hours before. Now, all she wanted was the sanctuary of her first-class suite on Global Airlines Flight 104 to London Heathrow. Maya moved through the terminal with the quiet confidence of someone who lived out of a suitcase but made it look effortless. She was dressed in comfortable, understated luxury, a camel, Loro Piana cashmere sweater, tailored charcoal trousers, and classic loafers. She pulled her scuffed but trusty silver Rimowa carry-on behind her. It was a bag that had seen Tokyo, Dubai, Paris, and Johannesburg, bearing the invisible scars of 1,000,000 air miles. She bypassed the chaotic general security lines, flashing her chairman's club status to the TSA agent, and slipped into the expedited lane. Within minutes, she was inside the airline's flagship lounge. The atmosphere here was a stark contrast to the zoo outside. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. The scent of roasted coffee and fresh linen hung in the air, and business executives huddled in private booths, typing furiously on laptops. Maya found a quiet corner, ordered a sparkling water with a twist of lime, and finally allowed her shoulders to drop. She pulled out her phone, sending a quick text to her mother. "Deal is done. Boarding soon. See you in London." Even in the lounge, Maya could feel the subtle, lingering glances. It was a reality she had navigated her entire life. Corporate America, and the luxury spaces that accompanied it, were still overwhelmingly white and male. A young, black woman sitting alone in the VIP lounge, casually sipping San Pellegrino while reviewing legal documents on an iPad, was an anomaly to many. Maya was used to the double takes. She was used to the unspoken question hovering in the eyes of older men in tailored suits. Who is she working for? She had long ago learned to armor herself with indifference. She had earned her place. She had outworked, out-hustled, and outperformed everyone in her cohort. Flight 104 to London Heathrow is now boarding our first class and chairman's club passengers at gate B22, a smooth voice announced over the intercom. Maya packed up her tablet, left a generous cash tip for the lounge attendant, and made her way to the gate. The boarding process was seamless. She walked down the jet bridge, the familiar smell of jet fuel and sanitized cabin air greeting her. "Welcome aboard, Miss Caldwell," the lead purser, a tall, distinguished-looking man named Thomas, greeted her at the door, glancing at his tablet. "Suite 4A, right this way. Let me know if I can get you a pre-departure beverage." "Just water, please." "Thank you, Thomas," Maya smiled warmly. She navigated the wide aisle of the first-class cabin. The suites were pristine, featuring sliding privacy doors, deep leather seats, and large entertainment screens. Maya stowed her Rimowa in the overhead bin, placed her noise-canceling Bose headphones on the side console, and sank into the plush leather of 4A. She closed her eyes, letting out a long breath. The hard part was over. Now, she had 7 hours of uninterrupted peace across the Atlantic. Or so she thought. 10 minutes later, the general boarding process began to trickle in. The cabin was slowly filling up with the rustle of expensive coats and the murmurs of privileged travelers settling into their transatlantic cocoons. Maya had her eyes closed, listening to a lo-fi jazz playlist, when she felt a sharp tap on her shoulder. She opened her eyes and pulled off one side of her headphones. Standing in the aisle, looming over her suite, was a woman in her late 60s. She was the textbook definition of upper-crust entitlement. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair that hadn't moved since 1990, a Chanel tweed blazer, a double strand of heavy pearls, and an expression that looked as if she had just stepped in something foul. "Excuse me," the woman said, her voice sharp and nasal. "You're in my seat." Maya blinked, the remnants of sleep vanishing instantly. She looked at the woman, then glanced at the illuminated seat number above her suite, 4A. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I believe I'm in the correct seat. This is 4A," Maya replied politely, her tone even and professional. The woman's eyes darted over Maya, taking in her skin color, her youth, and her casual attire, completely missing the expensive quality of the fabric. Her lips thinned into a hard, skeptical line. "I highly doubt that. My ticket says row 4. Economy and premium are further back, dear. You must have taken a wrong turn at the door. It happens." The condescension in the word dear dripped like battery acid. Maya felt the familiar, exhaustion-fueled spark of irritation flare in her chest. She had literally just closed a multi-million-dollar deal, and now she was being treated like a confused trespasser. "I haven't taken a wrong turn," Maya said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave, losing its customer service warmth. "My boarding pass is for 4A. Perhaps you are in 4B, across the aisle." The woman whose luggage tags boldly proclaimed her name as Beatrice Harrington scoffed loudly. It was a theatrical sound, designed to draw attention. "I know how to read a ticket. I always fly first class. And I know for a fact that this seat was supposed to be empty next to me. I specifically requested a quiet zone from the booking agent." "Then you should take that up with the booking agent, Mrs. Harrington," Maya said, catching the name on the Prada luggage tag. She slipped her headphone back on, effectively ending the conversation. Beatrice gasped, her face flushing a mottled pink. The absolute audacity of this young black woman ignoring her was apparently too much to bear. "Excuse me, I am not finished speaking with you." Maya didn't look up. Beatrice immediately spun around, her eyes scanning the cabin until she locked onto a young flight attendant named Chloe. "I was carrying a tray of warm nuts and champagne." "You, stewardess!" Beatrice snapped, snapping her fingers in the air. Chloe, looking slightly panicked, hurried over. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you?" "This person," Beatrice gestured wildly toward Maya, as if pointing at a stray dog that had wandered into a Michelin-starred restaurant, "is in my space. She is refusing to move to her correct cabin, and she is being incredibly rude about it. I need her removed from this suite immediately." Chloe blinked, looking nervously between Beatrice's enraged face and Maya, who was now watching the exchange with cool, detached eyes. Chloe was young, perhaps in her first year of international routes, and the ingrained training to placate wealthy, aggressive passengers kicked in instantly. She turned to Maya. Excuse me, miss," Chloe said, her voice trembling slightly. "Could I please see your boarding pass?" Maya froze. The cabin around them had gone deathly quiet. The other passengers, mostly older, wealthy, white men and women, were now openly staring, watching the drama unfold. Maya felt a hot flush of humiliation and deep, profound anger rise in her throat. Thomas, the purser, had already checked her ticket at the door. He had greeted her by name. She was sitting in the seat, settled, with a pre-departure drink on her console. Yet, the moment a white woman complained, Maya's right to exist in this space was immediately heavily questioned. "Chloe, is it?" Maya asked, reading the flight attendant's name tag. "Thomas already verified my boarding pass when I boarded." "I know, but, well, there seems to be a mix-up, and just to clear things up for Mrs. Harrington, if I could just see it." Chloe stammered, clearly intimidated by Beatrice, who was now standing with her arms crossed, a smug, triumphant look on her face. Maya knew the game. If she refused, she became the angry, difficult black woman. If she complied, she swallowed her dignity to comfort a racist assumption. With slow, deliberate movements, Maya picked up her phone, unlocked it, pulled up the Global Airlines app, and held the bright screen up for Chloe to see. Maya Caldwell, Flight 104, Seat 4A, First Class. Chloe looked at the screen, then flushed a deep crimson. I'm so sorry, Miss Caldwell. You are in the correct seat. She turned to Beatrice, her voice apologetic. Ma'am, she is assigned to 4A. Your seat is 4B, right across the aisle. Maya expected Beatrice to huff, perhaps mutter an apology, and take her seat. She underestimated the sheer, boundless depths of Beatrice Harrington's entitlement. Instead of backing down, Beatrice's eyes narrowed. Being proven wrong in public had mortally wounded her pride, and rather than accept defeat, she doubled down, pivoting her attack. Well, I don't care what that little screen says, Beatrice hissed, her voice rising in pitch, cutting through the quiet cabin. She probably used miles or got an upgrade by mistake. I paid full fare for my ticket. And I am telling you right now, I refuse to sit next to her. She has been incredibly hostile and aggressive since I boarded. I feel unsafe. Unsafe. The word hung in the air like a live grenade. Maya's stomach plummeted. It was the ultimate trump card, the historical weaponization of white female fragility. By claiming she felt unsafe, Beatrice was no longer just complaining about a seat. She was invoking a security threat. "Excuse me?" Maya said, her voice sharp and loud enough for the surrounding rows to hear. "I have not spoken more than 20 words to you. I have been sitting here reading. Do not project your prejudice onto me and call it fear." "Listen to her!" Beatrice shrieked, clutching her pearls in a gesture so cliché it would have been comical if the situation weren't so dangerous. "She's threatening me!" "Are you going to let her speak to me like that?" Chloe was entirely out of her depth. She backed up, her hands fluttering. Let me get the purser." Moments later, Thomas hurried down the aisle. He took one look at the scene, Maya sitting rigid with quiet fury, Beatrice standing in the aisle performing an Oscar-worthy display of distress, and let out a silent sigh. "What seems to be the problem here?" Thomas asked, keeping his voice low and soothing. "This passenger is aggressive," Beatrice immediately lied, pointing a manicured finger at Maya. "She insulted me. She's taking up the overhead space with her battered luggage, and she is making me feel physically threatened. I am a Platinum Medallion member, and I demand that she be moved to the back of the plane immediately, or I will be calling the police." Thomas looked at Maya. Maya looked back, her eyes silently pleading with him to do the right thing, to remember their polite interaction just 20 minutes ago. "Miss Caldwell," Thomas said, and Maya's heart sank at the diplomatic, appeasing tone in his voice. The airline script was kicking in. De-escalate, appease the loudest complainer, maintain schedule. Obviously, there is some friction here. We do have one open seat in the premium economy cabin. To keep the peace, and to ensure we push back from the gate on time, would you be willing to relocate? Maya stared at him, stunned. "You want me to downgrade my seat a seat I paid for because this woman is throwing a tantrum based on a racist assumption?" "I am not racist," Beatrice gasped loudly. "I have a black housekeeper. How dare you?" "Miss Caldwell, please keep your voice down," Thomas warned gently, entirely ignoring Beatrice's outburst. "I am trying to resolve this without getting the captain or port authority involved. If a passenger feels unsafe, we have protocols. Then remove the passenger who is causing the disturbance." Maya fired back, her hands shaking slightly. She forced them into her lap, clenching them into fists. She knew that if she raised her voice, if she stood up, if she showed a fraction of the rage burning inside her, they would use it as an excuse to drag her off the plane. "I am not moving. If you refuse to follow crew instructions, Miss Caldwell, we will have to call airport security to escort you off the aircraft," Thomas said, his face tightening. "Please, just take your bag and move to premium economy. We will refund you the difference in fare." Beatrice smirked, a nasty, victorious little smile playing on her lips. She had won. She had bent the world to her will, just as she always did. Maya felt a heavy, crushing weight press down on her chest. The injustice of it was suffocating. She looked around the cabin. Several people were avoiding her gaze, looking down at their phones or out the windows. Nobody wanted to get involved. Nobody wanted to delay their flight to London. Thomas, a deep, calm, and immensely authoritative voice cut through the tension. Everyone turned. The voice came from Suite 3A, directly in front of Maya. A man slowly stood up. He was in his late 50s, dressed impeccably in a bespoke navy suit, with silver hair and sharp, intelligent gray eyes. He didn't look angry, he looked disappointed, and in the corporate world that specific look of disappointment was far more terrifying than anger. Thomas paled instantly. "Mr. Hayes." "I'm so sorry for the disturbance, sir. We're handling it." Jonathan Hayes, the founder and CEO of Hayes Global Investment, and crucially, the majority shareholder and chairman of the board for the airline's parent company, stepped out of his suite into the aisle. "You aren't handling anything, Thomas," Jonathan said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of a sledgehammer. "You are accommodating a bully, and you are threatening to remove a paying customer who has done absolutely nothing wrong." Beatrice bristled, unfamiliar with being spoken to in such a manner. "Excuse me, sir, but mind your own business. This woman threatened me." Jonathan didn't even look at Beatrice. He kept his eyes locked on the purser. "Thomas, I have been sitting here for the last 15 minutes. I heard every word. Miss Caldwell here has been nothing but polite. That woman," he finally gestured to Beatrice without looking at her, "approached her, harassed her, and fabricated a lie to have her removed because she didn't like the look of her." "Sir, with all due respect, protocols state," Thomas began, sweating profusely now. "I know the protocols, Thomas. I helped draft them," Jonathan interrupted smoothly. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out his black chairman's card, tossing it casually onto the console of Suite 3A. "Protocol dictates that abusive passengers who disrupt the boarding process and harass other customers are the ones to be removed, not the victims of their harassment." Beatrice let out a loud, scoffing laugh. "You think because you have a fancy card you can dictate what happens on this plane? I'm calling the police." Jonathan finally turned to look at Beatrice. His gaze was icy. "Please do, Mrs. Harrington, because I happen to know the Port Authority chief quite well. And while you're at it, you might want to call your husband Richard. Tell him that Jonathan Hayes says hello, and that we will be reviewing the Harrington family's credit lines at our bank first thing Monday morning." Beatrice's mouth snapped shut. All the color drained from her face, leaving her looking old and suddenly very, very fragile. The name dropped like a physical blow. She knew exactly who Jonathan Hayes was now. "Now," Jonathan said, turning back to Thomas, his voice brooking no argument. "You have two choices, Thomas. You either escort Mrs. Harrington off my airplane immediately, or you and I will have a very long conversation with the CEO of this airline about your employment status by the time we land in London." The silence that followed Jonathan Hayes's ultimatum was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that sucked the oxygen out of the cabin, leaving nothing but the hum of the aircraft's auxiliary power unit and the ragged, shallow breathing of Thomas, the purser. Beatrice Harrington stood frozen in the aisle, her manicured hand still hovering near her pearls. The triumphant, nasty little smirk had vanished, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated panic. The sudden shift in power dynamics had given her whiplash. In her world, the insulated bubble of Upper East Side galas, private country clubs, and legacy wealth, she was untouchable. She was the one who dictated the terms. She was the one who made the complaints that got people fired. But looking into the cold, flinty gray eyes of Jonathan Hayes, Beatrice realized with horrifying clarity that she had just picked a fight with the apex predator of her own ecosystem. Mr. Hayes, Beatrice stammered, her voice losing all its shrill authority, dropping into a breathless, placating register. She attempted a strained, wobbly smile. "Jonathan, goodness, it's been a while since the Met Gala charity dinner. There's been a terrible misunderstanding here. There is no misunderstanding, Beatrice." Jonathan cut her off, his voice flat and devoid of any social warmth. He didn't offer her the courtesy of acknowledging her attempt at familiarity. "I watched you approach a seated passenger. I watched you insult her, question her right to be in this cabin, and then fabricate a malicious lie about your personal safety to leverage the flight crew against her, all because you didn't want a black woman sitting next to you." "That is not true," Beatrice gasped, though her eyes darted nervously around the cabin. The other passengers, who had cowardly buried their faces in their screens just moments before, were now openly glaring at her. The tide had turned. Wealthy crowds are notoriously fickle, and the moment Jonathan Hays established the moral high ground, the rest of the first-class cabin aligned with him. A man in 2B muttered, "Just get off the plane, lady. We have a slot to catch." "Thomas," Jonathan said, not taking his eyes off Beatrice, "I am waiting." Thomas looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine. His career, his pension, his entire livelihood were hanging by a thread. He had chosen the path of least resistance by targeting Maya, the younger, quieter passenger, assuming Beatrice held the power. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Right away, "Mr. Hays." Thomas swallowed hard. He turned his radio mic to his mouth. "Flight deck. This is the purser. We have a security issue in first class. We need the gate agent and port authority to board immediately. We are offloading a passenger." "You can't do this," Beatrice shrieked, the panic finally breaking through her veneer of civility. "I am Beatrice Harrington. My husband will sue this airline into the ground. We are flying to London for a royal charity event." "Your husband, Richard, is currently leveraged to his eyeballs on a failing commercial real estate venture in Hudson Yards," Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a conversational, lethal volume that carried perfectly in the quiet cabin. "His firm, Harrington Holdings, has been aggressively lobbying my bank for a $300 million bridge loan for the past month to avoid insolvency. I had a meeting scheduled with him for Tuesday to finalize the term sheet." Beatrice's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The blood rushed from her face so fast Maya genuinely thought the older woman might faint. "I suggest you use the time you're about to spend sitting in the terminal to call Richard," Jonathan continued ruthlessly. "Tell him the Tuesday meeting is canceled. Tell him Hays Global Investment is passing on the loan, and tell him exactly why." Two heavy thuds sounded from the jet bridge, followed by the heavy, authoritative footsteps of two armed Port Authority police officers stepping onto the aircraft, accompanied by a frantic-looking gate agent. "What's the situation here?" the lead officer, a burly man with the name tag Miller, asked, looking between the tense faces. "This passenger," Thomas said, pointing a shaking finger at Beatrice, finally finding his backbone now that the chairman of the board was watching his every move, "has caused a major disturbance, harassed another passenger, and is refusing crew instructions. The captain has requested she be removed from the flight." Officer Miller nodded, his face impassive. He turned to Beatrice. "Ma'am, grab your bags. You need to come with us." "To here," attended Ackles. "I am a Platinum Medallion member," Beatrice whispered weakly, her voice trembling. The fight had entirely left her. The realization of what she had just cost her husband and her lifestyle was crashing down on her in real time. "I don't care if you own the plane, ma'am." "Let's go," Officer Miller said, stepping closer, his hand resting casually on his duty belt. "Walk, or we will carry you. Your choice." It was the ultimate humiliation. Beatrice Harrington, dressed in her Chanel tweed and heavy pearls, had to reach into the overhead bin, drag out her Prada carry-on, and execute the walk of shame. As she was escorted down the aisle toward the front exit, the silence in the cabin was broken by the sound of scattered, slow clapping from the business class section just behind the partition. Maya sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her lap. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving behind a cold, hollow exhaustion. She watched Beatrice's retreating back disappear onto the jet bridge. The heavy aircraft door was finally pulled shut, locking with a definitive, satisfying clunk. Within minutes of Beatrice's unceremonious exit, the frantic energy in the cabin shifted. The captain's voice came over the intercom, offering a smooth, practiced apology for the minor delay and confirming they were cleared for pushback. As the massive Boeing 777 began to slowly roll away from gate B-22, Thomas materialized next to Maya's suite. The purser looked physically diminished, the crisp authority of his uniform sagging around his shoulders. He carried a silver tray holding a crystal flute of vintage Dom Perignon and a warm, scented towel. "Miss Caldwell," Thomas began, his voice barely above a whisper, heavy with shame. He couldn't meet her eyes. I want to offer my profound, unreserved apologies for my behavior during the boarding process. It was inexcusable. I failed to protect you as a passenger, and I allowed my judgment to be clouded by Mrs. Harrington's aggression. I am deeply sorry." Maya looked at the champagne, then up at Thomas's face. She was tired. The bone-deep exhaustion of her 72-hour work week was colliding with the emotional toll of the racial profiling she had just endured. "Put the tray down, Thomas," Maya said quietly. Thomas quickly set the tray on her side console, wringing his hands. "I appreciate the apology," Maya continued, her voice steady, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "But you didn't just fail to protect me. You actively participated in my humiliation. You asked me to leave a seat I paid for because a white woman lied and said she felt unsafe. You knew it was a lie, and you chose to accommodate her racism rather than do your job." Thomas swallowed hard, his face flushing crimson. "You are right, ma'am, completely right. I have already filed an incident report citing my own failure in protocol. I have also credited 200,000 miles to your account, though I know that doesn't fix it." "It doesn't," Maya agreed. "Do better next time, Thomas. When a passenger shows you who they are, believe them the first time. You can go." Thomas nodded sharply, murmured another apology, and retreated to the galley. Maya picked up the warm towel, pressing it against her face, letting the steam open her pores and ground her breathing. The engines roared to life, a deep, vibrating hum that signaled their imminent departure. As the plane taxied down the runway and finally thrust into the dark night sky over New York, Maya let out a long, shaky breath. "Are you all right?" Maya lowered the towel and turned her head. Across the aisle, leaning slightly out of Suite 3A, Jonathan Hayes was watching her. The fierce, intimidating boardroom persona he had wielded against Beatrice and Thomas was gone, replaced by a look of quiet, genuine concern. "I'm fine," Maya said, offering a small, polite smile, "just waiting for the adrenaline crash. Thank you, Mr. Hayes, seriously. You didn't have to step in, but I am incredibly grateful that you did." Jonathan waved a hand dismissively. "Call me Jonathan, please. And I absolutely had to step in. I despise bullies, especially the ones who hide behind their country club memberships and weaponize their fragility. Besides, I couldn't let Harrington's wife delay the flight of the woman who just closed the Apex Technologies acquisition." Maya froze. The champagne flute she had just picked up halted halfway to her mouth. She stared at him, her mind racing. "Excuse me? How do you know about the Apex deal?" Jonathan smiled, a warm, knowing expression that reached his gray eyes. He unbuckled his seatbelt as the chime signaled they had reached 10,000 feet. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the small leather companion seat inside Maya's suite. "Of course," Maya said, shifting her legs to make room. Jonathan stepped over, settling into the suite opposite her. Up close, Maya could see the sharp intelligence radiating from him. "Oak and Sterling is a fantastic venture capital firm, Maya. You guys are aggressive, smart, and you see angles that the legacy firms in Silicon Valley miss. That's why Hayes Global Investment underwrites a significant portion of your firm's mezzanine debt." Maya's jaw tightened in realization. "You're the silent LP." "I am," Jonathan nodded, looking impressed. "Your senior partner, David Oak, sends me the quarterly briefs. I read your restructuring plan for the Apex buyout last night while I was packing for this London trip. The way you bypassed the traditional equity dilution by leveraging their intellectual property assets as collateral. It was nothing short of brilliant. David mentioned you hadn't slept in 3 days getting it across the finish line." Maya let out a breathless laugh, shaking her head. The sheer coincidence of it all was staggering. Out of all the flights, out of all the first-class cabins in the world, she was sitting across the aisle from the man who held the purse strings to her firm's biggest plays. "Well," Maya said, a genuine smile finally breaking through, "I definitely wasn't planning on giving an impromptu board presentation at 30,000 feet, Jonathan. But thank you. It was a brutal negotiation, but we got the terms we wanted. I know you did. And you earned this seat, Maya." 10 times over, Jonathan said softly, his tone shifting back to the incident at the gate. "What happened back there? It happens too often. The corporate world, the luxury world, it is incredibly resistant to change. People like Beatrice Harrington are terrified of people like you, because you represent the fact that the world they inherited is being outsmarted by people who actually had to work for it." Maya looked down at her hands. "It's exhausting. You spend your whole life proving you belong in the room, only to have someone try to throw you out of the chair." "I know," Jonathan said quietly, "but she won't be throwing anyone out of any chairs for a very long time." Maya looked up, intrigued. "You weren't bluffing back there? About her husband's firm?" A sharp, predatory smile touched the corners of Jonathan's mouth. It was the smile of a man who moved billions of dollars with a single phone call. "Maya, in my line of work, I never bluff. Richard Harrington has been running a Ponzi-adjacent real estate scheme for 5 years. The market shifted, interest rates spiked, and suddenly, he's swimming naked. My team was on the fence about bailing him out on Tuesday. We didn't like the risk, but he has deep political ties." Jonathan picked up his glass of sparkling water, taking a slow sip. "But after tonight?" Jonathan continued, his eyes turning cold again. "After watching his wife treat a brilliant, young executive who happens to be generating a 20% year-over-year return for my portfolio like a second-class citizen, the risk is no longer palatable to me. When we land in London, I am making one phone call to my chief risk officer. Harrington Holdings is going to default by Friday. They will lose the townhouses, the Hamptons estate, and Beatrice's platinum medallion status." He looked at Maya, raising his glass in a silent toast. "Karma, Maya, is a very real thing. Sometimes it just needs a little push from the chairman's board." The descent into London Heathrow was accompanied by the soft clinking of porcelain coffee cups and the hushed, ambient murmur of the first-class cabin preparing for arrival. For Maya Caldwell, the remaining 6 hours of Flight 104 had not been spent resting. Instead, they had been a masterclass in high-stakes corporate maneuvering, conducted in the quiet, pressurized bubble of the aircraft. Leaning across the aisle from his suite, Jonathan Hayes had methodically dismantled the illusion of the Harrington family's immense wealth. He walked Maya through the exact structural weaknesses of the Harrington Holdings portfolio. Richard Harrington, Jonathan explained, had built a sprawling commercial real estate empire on a foundation of aggressive leverage and cheap debt. When the market shifted and interest rates spiked, Richard had found himself trapped, holding billions in underperforming assets in Hudson Yards and Midtown Manhattan. His entire survival hinged on a massive $300 million mezzanine bridge loan from Hayes Global Investment, a lifeline meant to satisfy his panicked secondary lenders. As the massive Boeing 777's tires finally kissed the British tarmac, the thrust reversers roaring to life, Jonathan didn't wait for the seatbelt sign to chime. He pulled out his encrypted, satellite-enabled smartphone. He entirely bypassed his usual layers of executive assistants and dialed his chief risk officer directly in New York. It was barely 2 a.m. on the East Coast. "Calantha," Jonathan said, his voice a low, lethal hum that carried a terrifying finality. "Pull the term sheet for the Harrington Holdings bridge loan. Yes, entirely. Kill the deal. I want a formal notice of withdrawal sitting on Richard Harrington's desk by 8 o'clock this morning. If his general counsel calls, you tell him Hayes Global Investment is exercising our discretionary pullout clause due to newly discovered severe reputational risks." Jonathan paused, his sharp gray eyes meeting Maya's across the aisle. He offered a grim, satisfied nod. "And Calantha? Call our contacts at Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs. Leak our withdrawal to their analysts. Let the street know we looked under the hood of Harrington Holdings and found something we absolutely despised. Burn the bridge to the ground." Jonathan tapped the screen to end the call and tucked the phone back into his tailored blazer. The dominoes are officially falling. Maya. By noon, Richard Harrington won't be able to borrow a dime in Manhattan. 3,000 miles away, in a grim, sterile room at the TWA Hotel at JFK Airport, the sun was just beginning to rise over the sprawling concrete footprint of the tarmac. Beatrice Harrington was furiously pacing the length of the cheap carpet, her hands trembling as she clutched her cell phone. Her night had been an unmitigated, catastrophic disaster. After being unceremoniously escorted off Flight 104 by armed Port Authority officers, she had been detained in a windowless security room for 2 hours. There, a stern representative from Global Airlines had formally informed her that she was permanently banned from flying with their carrier or any of their global partners. Her coveted platinum medallion status, a symbol of her societal worth, was revoked, effective immediately, under the airline's strict zero-tolerance policy for passenger harassment and racial profiling. She had spent the last several hours stewing in a toxic mixture of humiliation, righteous rage, and a creeping, icy dread about the parting words Jonathan Hayes had delivered. She had tried to call Richard 6 times, but he had been at a closed-door, no-phones-allowed dinner with overseas investors from Dubai. At exactly 8:15 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, Richard Harrington, a man whose entire public persona was meticulously constructed upon bespoke Tom Ford suits, slicked-back silver hair, and a manufactured aura of total invincibility, strode into his corner office at 55 Water Street. He was expecting a triumphant morning. The Hayes deal was supposed to close tomorrow, providing the liquid capital he desperately needed to stave off his aggressive creditors. But as he pushed open the heavy mahogany doors, he stopped dead in his tracks. His chief financial officer, Peter Reynolds, was already waiting for him. Peter was slouched in a leather guest chair, sweating profusely, his tie loosened. He looked as if he had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. The dual Bloomberg terminals on Richard's massive desk were flashing red, a chaotic cascade of plunging bond prices and panicked alerts. "Peter, what the hell is going on?" Richard snapped, tossing his Italian leather briefcase onto the sofa. "Tell me Hayes signed the final term sheet. We have margin calls hitting from Deutsche Bank tomorrow morning. We need that cash." Peter didn't speak immediately. He simply reached across the desk with a trembling hand and slid a single, crisp piece of heavy cardstock toward his boss. It was a formal letterhead from Hayes Global Investment. "Hayes pulled out," Peter said, his voice cracking, thick with panic. "The deal is dead, Richard. He didn't just pull out, he weaponized the withdrawal. The street is already panicking. Our secondary lenders at Goldman Sachs caught wind of it 20 minutes ago. They're triggering the cross-default provisions on our existing debt. They're demanding $200 million in liquid collateral by Friday, or they seize the Hudson Yards properties." Richard stared at the letterhead, the bold, black ink blurring before his eyes. The blood drained from his face so rapidly he had to grip the edge of his desk to remain standing. The air was entirely sucked from his lungs. "That's impossible. We had a verbal agreement. We passed their due diligence." Why would Jonathan Hayes pull out at the 11th hour? Before Peter could offer a theory, Richard's private, encrypted cell phone rang. It was Beatrice. Still staring at the termination letter, Richard snatched the phone up, pressing it to his ear. "Beatrice, I cannot deal with whatever country club drama you have right now. I am in the middle of a crisis." "Richard," Beatrice wailed, her voice shrill and hysterical, "you have to call our lawyers and sue Global Airlines. They threw me off the plane to London. The police escorted me out like a common criminal, and it was all because of that arrogant, horrible man, Jonathan Hayes, and some girl in first class who refused to move." Richard stopped breathing. The opulent office around him began to spin. He gripped the heavy phone so hard his knuckles turned a sickly white. "Beatrice," he interrupted, his voice dropping into a hoarse, terrifying whisper that made Peter Reynolds flinch. "What did you just say? What did you do?" "I didn't do anything," she shrieked defensively, oblivious to the gravity of the situation. "There was a woman in my cabin who didn't belong there, and I simply asked the flight crew to remove her, and then Jonathan Hayes got involved and made a massive scene." "You interacted with Jonathan Hayes?" Richard screamed, the sound echoing violently off the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of his office. "You picked a public fight in front of the chairman of Hayes Global Investment, the man holding the absolute lifeline to our entire company?" He said he was canceling your meeting," Beatrice stammered, the reality of her husband's venomous tone finally breaking through her impenetrable wall of narcissism. "Richard, what is happening?" "You stupid, arrogant woman," Richard hissed, hot tears of pure, unadulterated panic pricking his eyes. "You just bankrupted us. You destroyed everything we have." He slammed the phone down onto his desk, shattering the glass screen into a spiderweb of cracks. The collapse of the House of Harrington was not a slow, dignified leak. It was a catastrophic, violent implosion. In the ruthless financial sector, perception is reality. When an institution like Hayes Global Investment, a firm universally respected for its impeccable, flawless due diligence, suddenly flees a massive deal, the sharks immediately smell blood in the water. Within 48 hours, the financial press had caught wind of the escalating crisis. The Wall Street Journal ran a devastating front-page exposé detailing Harrington Holdings' over-leveraged assets and toxic debt profile. Because Hayes's withdrawal was so sudden and highly publicized, it triggered an automatic, deep-dive audit by the Securities and Exchange Commission. Dozens of federal investigators from the SEC and the Southern District of New York, SDNY, descended on the Water Street offices by Thursday morning, carrying boxes and hard drives out in plain view of the press cameras. What the forensic accountants found wasn't just poor portfolio management or bad market timing. It was deliberate, systemic, and highly illegal fraud. Richard Harrington had been artificially inflating the appraisal values of his commercial properties for years to secure progressively larger loans, running a classic Ponzi-adjacent structure that relied on constant, desperate refinancing to stay afloat. By Friday evening, as the markets closed, Richard Harrington was in federal custody. He had frantically retained the high-profile criminal defense firm of Brafman and Associates to try and keep him out of a federal penitentiary. But the evidence was insurmountable. Their entire world evaporated overnight. The sprawling Southampton estate, the multi-million-dollar Upper East Side penthouse, the corporate bank accounts, and the fleet of black cars, all of it was instantly seized by the federal government under strict asset forfeiture laws pending his criminal trial. The empire was gone, shattered into a million irrecoverable pieces by a single, arrogant display of prejudice on an airplane. 6 months later, the crisp, biting autumn wind of late October whipped through the elevated drop-off lanes at John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4. Maya Caldwell stepped out of the warmth of a chauffeured black Lincoln Navigator, her breath pluming in the chill morning air. She handed the driver, an older gentleman named Michael, a crisp $100 bill. "Have a good week, Miss Caldwell," Michael said, tipping his cap as he unloaded her familiar, scuffed silver Rimowa suitcase onto the curb. "You too, Michael. See you on Thursday," Maya replied, her voice steady and thrumming with an underlying current of energy. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. The bone-deep exhaustion that had once shadowed her eyes was entirely gone, replaced by the unmistakable, terrifying glow of a woman operating at the absolute peak of her professional power. Following the wildly successful Apex Technologies acquisition and the subsequent, highly lucrative restructuring backed by Hayes Global Investment, the board of directors at Oak and Sterling hadn't just given her a historic bonus. They had unanimously voted to elevate her to managing partner. At 32, she was the youngest person, and the first black woman, to hold the title in the firm's ruthless 60-year history. Today, she was flying to Paris to negotiate a complex joint venture with a titan of a French luxury conglomerate. She was dressed for the kill, a bespoke tailored midnight blue blazer, a crisp white silk blouse, and the quiet confidence of someone who no longer had to prove she belonged in the room because she practically owned the building. As Maya walked through the automatic sliding glass doors of the terminal, the chaotic symphony of international travel washed over her. She bypassed the sprawling, zigzagging lines of the main ticketing counters, heading straight for the velvet ropes of the expedited Chairman's Club security checkpoint. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Jonathan Hayes. "Heard you're heading to CDG. Have a glass of the vintage Krug on me in the lounge. We need to discuss the tech IPO term sheets the minute you get back. Safe travels." Maya smiled, typing a quick reply. "Save the term sheets for Friday. I plan on sleeping on the way back. Cheers, Jonathan." She slipped the phone back into her pocket and continued her brisk walk. But as she passed the far end of the terminal, the desolate, dimly lit corner reserved for ultra-budget domestic carriers known for hidden fees and cramped seating, a loud, shrill, and painfully familiar voice cut through the ambient noise. "What do you mean it's declined? Run it again. It's a gold card. There must be a mistake with your machine." Maya slowed her pace, her loafers coming to a halt near a concrete pillar. She glanced over her shoulder toward the bright yellow counters of Sunjet Airlines. Standing there, arguing furiously with an exhausted-looking ticketing agent, was Beatrice Harrington. The transformation was so jarring, so brutally complete, that Maya almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the pristine Chanel tweed, the perfectly tailored slacks, and the heavy, double-strand pearls. The woman standing at the budget counter was wearing a rumpled, off-the-rack beige trench coat that looked 2 sizes too big, paired with scuffed, unbranded black flats. Her blonde hair, once a monument to expensive Upper East Side salons, was pulled back in a severe, messy clasp, revealing 2 inches of stark gray roots. Beside Beatrice sat 2 heavy, battered suitcases, not Prada, not Louis Vuitton, but cheap, scuffed polycarbonate with broken zippers held together by a fraying bungee cord. "Ma'am," the Sunjet ticketing agent said flatly, her voice entirely devoid of the placating, customer service warmth Beatrice had once demanded from first-class pursers. The agent popped a bubble of bright pink chewing gum. "The machine is fine." The card declined. "Insufficient funds. If you cannot pay the $75 checked bag fee, I cannot print your boarding pass for the flight to Fort Lauderdale." Maya stood perfectly still, watching the scene unfold. She knew the backstory, of course. Everyone in Manhattan's financial sector did. The fall of the House of Harrington had been spectacular, bloody, and incredibly public. Once Jonathan Hayes had pulled the massive bridge loan, triggering the cross-default provisions on Richard Harrington's other debts, the dominoes had fallen with terrifying speed. The SEC and the Southern District of New York had raided Harrington Holdings within 48 hours. They uncovered a massive, decade-long scheme of inflating commercial property appraisals to secure fraudulent loans. Facing a mountain of irrefutable evidence, Richard Harrington had taken a brutal plea deal to avoid a 20-year sentence. He was currently serving 5 years at the Federal Correctional Institution in Otisville. The financial fallout for Beatrice had been absolute. The government had seized everything under the asset forfeiture laws: the sprawling Southampton estate, the Water Street offices, the fleet of cars, and the Upper East Side penthouse. Beatrice had been left with nothing but a minuscule, heavily monitored allowance from a frozen trust. Stripped of her country club memberships, her platinum medallion status, and her social standing, she had been forced to quietly relocate to a tiny, 2-bedroom condo in a humid, less than desirable suburb of Fort Lauderdale, owned by her estranged sister. "Do you know who I am?" Beatrice hissed at the Sunjet agent. But the words lacked their former venom. There was no arrogant tilt to her chin, no weaponized fragility. It sounded like a desperate, hollow echo of a ghost. "My husband—" "I don't care who your husband is," the agent interrupted. Her patience entirely evaporated. "The fee is $75, cash, or a different card. Otherwise, you need to step out of the line so I can help the next passenger." The crowd of travelers waiting behind Beatrice began to groan and mutter. It was the exact same sound of privileged impatience that Beatrice had once wielded against Maya on Flight 104. "Come on, lady, just move," a burly man in a baseball cap yelled from 3 people back, throwing his hands up in the air. "Some of us have places to be. If you can't afford to fly, take a bus." Beatrice's shoulders slumped. The sheer, crushing weight of her new reality seemed to physically press her toward the scuffed linoleum floor. The public humiliation, the lack of deference, the realization that her tears and her demands meant absolutely nothing in this space it broke whatever fight she had left. With trembling, unmanicured hands, Beatrice unzipped her faded purse. She dug frantically past a pile of crumpled grocery receipts, finally fishing out 3 crumpled $20 bills and a 10. She smoothed them out on the counter, handing them to the agent with a face so pale and defeated it looked carved from chalk. "You have to put the bags on the scale yourself," the agent muttered, printing the cheap, thin paper boarding pass. Maya watched as Beatrice Harrington, a woman who had once snapped her fingers to have flight attendants fetch her champagne, struggled to hoist her own heavy, broken luggage onto the metal scale. She grunted with the effort, her breath catching, looking around wildly for a skycap or a porter who would never come. No one stepped forward to help her. No one cared. Maya felt no malice. She felt no burning, vindictive desire to walk over, tap Beatrice on the shoulder, and gloat. The universe had already handled the heavy lifting. The scales had been balanced with a ruthless, mathematical precision that no amount of petty revenge could match. Beatrice Harrington was exactly where she belonged, waiting at the back of the line, stripped of the unearned armor she had used to terrorize others, entirely invisible to the world she once thought she owned. Maya took a slow, deep breath, letting the chaotic noise of the terminal wash over her one last time. She turned her back on the budget counter, adjusted her grip on her Rimowa handle, and walked gracefully through the VIP security lane. She stepped onto the plush, soundproofed carpeting of the exclusive chairman's lounge, the heavy glass doors sliding shut behind her, sealing away the past. She had a flight to catch, and a world to conquer. There is a profound, undeniable justice that occasionally cuts through the insulated layers of wealth and privilege. Maya Caldwell's transatlantic flight began as a textbook display of systemic prejudice, a stark reminder of the invisible hurdles built into the architecture of elite spaces. Yet, the universe has a peculiar way of balancing its scales. Beatrice Harrington believed her status granted her the power to diminish others, failing to realize that true power whispers while arrogance shouts. The collapse of the Harrington Empire wasn't just financial ruin. It was the ultimate, inescapable consequence of unchecked entitlement, meeting an immovable wall of quiet excellence. Karma, in the end, is rarely a lightning strike. It is the slow, inevitable unwinding of a life built on the backs of others. Maya didn't have to raise her voice to win. She simply held her ground, allowing prejudice to architect its own spectacular, public downfall.